The Lower Churchill Environmental Assessment Panel is putting together the recommendations. One of the presenters from the public hearings say the recommendations will be window dressing. Kirk Lethbridge told us earlier this week he feels the deal is already sealed, and with work already being done on the project and the Innu voting yes to New Dawn agreement, he also fears the recommendations will be biased, favoring the government who established the panel. Gilbert Bennett is vice president of the Lower Churchill project with Nalcor Energy. He's on the line this morning. Mr. Bennett, good morning.
Good morning, Tony. How are you today?
I'm well, sir. Thanks for taking some time with us this morning. How do you respond to concerns that the panel's recommendations will be biased?
Wow, I think that's a fairly significant statement. I think when we look at the structure that we use for environmental assessment here in Canada, this is a very rigorous process. So right from the get-go, you have the two governments have responsibility for environmental assessment. They both have legislation that governs the completion of environmental assessment. In the case of the joint panel review process, the most rigorous process that we have in the country, this panel is struck with very well-qualified people with excellent credentials who have experience and history in this process, and have an obligation to provide advice to the two ministers who ultimately make the decision. It's a public process. It has ample opportunity for consultation throughout the process at multiple stages, right from the beginning, where the process begins, and we lay out the information that we provided as proponent, the review of that information, the public hearing process itself, and then finally an opportunity for public and Aboriginal comment on the report that the panel will ultimately present to the two ministers. Very rigorous process, and I think any bias in there will be pretty obvious once people see the report.
And how much consideration will be given to these recommendations when it comes to sanctioning this project?
Well, it's an important question for the two ministers. I mean, they struck this process for the express purpose of getting advice and organization of all the comments and information that was provided into the process. And it's those recommendations are out there publicly, and of course they will have to consider those recommendations in the context of regulation and legal requirements and I guess government policy at the end of the day.
Now, you hear the talk of, bias, as we just talked about, and the criticism then for already doing work when the environmental assessment has not been completed. What do you say to those folks?
Well, that's it's a bit of a chicken and egg situation, that if you waited till, first of all, if you didn't do any work, you wouldn't have any information in the environmental assessment. So the engineering work, for example, that we have done over the past number of years informed our work in the environmental assessment process. Helps us create cost estimates, helps us create a view of the environmental effects, the site, the design, the conditions that are associated with the site. So it's an important EA process. But at the same time, our mandate at Nalcor is to make sure that we're in a position to move forward with the project.
Now, the Innu of Labrador recently voted in favor of the New Dawn agreement, which is a big step forward for the project. What else needs to happen in order for the Lower Churchill project to go ahead at Muskrat Falls? Well,
we're moving about 5 different work streams in parallel in order to be ready to move forward. Our Aboriginal consultations and our IBA negotiations with Innu Nation are certainly an important work stream. The completion of the environmental assessment process is a prerequisite. We need a release from both governments in order to move forward. We have to be ready from an engineering perspective, so we have to have a certain level of design work ready. We certainly have to be in a position where our cost estimates and our schedule are refined. The design is ready to go. We were ready with contracts and tenders. That all has to be done in advance of construction start. We have our commercial and financing planning. And finally, we have to have our organization in place ready to move forward with the actual construction. So those are the major elements that we have a mandate to have ready when we're called upon to move forward with the project.
Now, what happens if the assessment comes back unfavorable for the project?
Well, then that's something we'll have to look at the time. We'll have to consider the panel's recommendations and see what they have to say on that point. I mean, our view as proponent going in, and we've made this clear through the assessment process, is that all the work that we've done, all the studies that we've completed, all the information that we've provided to the panel leads us to conclude that effective mitigation strategies can be put in place to deal with the effects of the project, and that the project should move forward, that it is in the public interest.
Ultimately, these are recommendations. Can they hold up or even stop the project from going ahead should government want to proceed?
Well, the government is going to have to look at those recommendations and understand why the panel, made the recommendations that they did. We'll have to consider, what applicable legislation and legal precedent and all those issues are going to have to be looked at, and they say, well, what was the basis for the recommendation, and then make an informed decision moving forward. And again, that's public process. Everybody will know the basis for that decision.
Now, we've had one delay on the expected release of the recommendations. What's the chances that will be delayed further? Or when can we expect to finally get them?
I think ultimately that's a question that's best answered by the panel. I think their view was that they had made a notice to the two ministers that they would be delayed till the end of August. So that's the best information that I have available as well.
You sat through the whole thing beginning to end. Are you satisfied with what was tabled and what was presented?
I think we're happy with the information that we provided, that we put forward into the hearing process. The process ran effectively from my point of view. Certainly, I think there was tremendous opportunity for people to make presentations and provide information to the panel. And I've said this before. I was very pleased with with the participation that did occur. I think there was good exchange throughout the hearing process.
All right, Mr. Bennett, that is our time this morning. Thanks for bringing us up to date. It's always great to have you on the program.
Thanks so much, Tony.
All right, that is Gilbert Bennett, Vice President of the Lower Churchill Project with Nalcor Energy. So what do you think? You've heard Mr. Bennett. You have thoughts. We'd like to hear them. You can share them with our talkback. Again, our numbers in Happy Valley Goose Bay, 896-3509, toll free, 1-888-699-8255. And you can email labradormorning@cbc.ca.